And now, from the University of Virginia Center for Politics.
Welcome, everybody, to a very special video edition of The Crystal Ball at the University of Virginia Center for Politics. And this time, instead of looking into the future on elections, we're going to be looking into the future of space travel and NASA. And we are so pleased and proud to have Bill Nelson, former congressman, former senator. He was an astronaut, and now he's the new administrator of NASA. He's with us. He has many qualifications, the most outstanding of which, actually, not the things I mentioned, but he is a graduate of the University of Virginia Law School. So I know he would agree with me on that. But anyway, Senator, if I can give you a brief formal introduction here, then we'll get right into the questions. And I'm also joined by several students who will have questions for you too, probably much better than the ones I'm going to ask you. Senator Bill Nelson was sworn in as the 14th NASA administrator on May 3rd, 2021, this year. And he was tasked with carrying out the Biden administration's vision for the agency. I mentioned he served in public office over 4 decades, almost 50 years, I believe. He represented Florida in the United States Senate for 18 years. And he chaired the Space Subcommittee of the U.S. House of Representatives for 6 years and was a ranking member of the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, where he was recognized as the leading space program advocate in Congress. So they're anxious to work with you, I'm sure. In 2010, this is interesting. This is now 11 years ago. Senator Nelson, with Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson, a Republican of Texas, sponsored and then passed the landmark NASA legislation that mapped out a new future for NASA and set the agency on its present dual course of both government and commercial missions. In 1986, as I mentioned, he flew on the 24th flight of the space shuttle. The mission on Columbia orbited the Earth 98 times over 6 days. He conducted 12 medical experiments, including the first American stress test in space and a cancer research experiment sponsored by university researchers. I mentioned his graduate degree, which is the most important part of his resume, but he also attended Yale University before he stepped up to the University of Virginia. He and his wife, Grace, who's a lovely person, have 2 grown children, Bill Jr. and Nan Ellen. And I'm just so pleased, Senator, that you took time for us. And we thank you very much for doing so. And I want to start out with that legislation. You helped to make commercial space travel possible. Is it going as you hoped? And do you believe that it will continue to go in a productive and constructive way with all of these new commercial outfits from Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and all the rest? Tell us what you think about that.
Well, the short answer is yes, and I'll give you a longer answer, but let me just say I'm glad to be back, Larry. Apparently, you didn't have enough of me before.
Never.
A few years back, and you've invited me back, so thank you. And of course, the education that y'all gave me at the law school, well, I'll tell you this about it. I'm the only lawyer that's flown in space, and NASA chose not to publicize that fact. So, all right, the answer to the question is yes. We actually, a former congressman, who, by the way, I just talked to today, Bob Walker, and I, and another Republican, Jim Sensenbrenner, did a commercial space bill back in the 80s in the House. We saw the potential back then. But Kay Bailey Hutchinson of Texas, who she and I alternated as the chairman or the ranking member, whoever had the majority, of the Space Subcommittee of the Commerce Committee in the Senate, then amplified that in 2005 with a commercial component to the NASA bill, but the big one was the one that you mentioned, 2010. And we set on the human space program, we set NASA on a dual course. One course was the commercial component. The other is NASA getting out of low Earth orbit and go explore the cosmos. And we see that now being a very successful implementation. We're seeing companies like SpaceX that are delivering crew to the International Space Station. It's a fixed price contract. We contract with the commercial company, but of course, when it involves human life, NASA astronauts, obviously NASA is all over that. We have other commercial contracts that are a delivery of cargo to the International Space Station. And because it is docking with the ISS, naturally NASA has to be all over that to make sure that it's safe and compatible. And then, of course, the commercial component has just exploded, and we're seeing all kind of research going on the International Space Station. We're going to try to keep the ISS going until 2030, and then we want to get out of the ISS. We want to have a commercial space station. We want a lot of this manufacturing and research that can be done and is being done by commercial companies to continue. And then you're going to see that lift out of low Earth orbit. And we're going to see that on the moon. And as soon as next year, accelerating in 2023, you are going to see commercial landers bringing NASA payloads and other university research payloads and other commercial payloads to the surface of the moon. And all of that is in preparation then for the first human commercial lander on the moon. Our NASA rocket, the Space Launch System, with its spacecraft Orion on the top, a capsule, will take the astronauts to lunar orbit. It will be a polar orbit of the moon. And then we will rendezvous on the third Artemis mission with a human lander built by one of the competitors. And they will then go down to the surface of the moon, demonstrate that capability, come back and rendezvous, and then Orion will take them back home. So there's a lot of commercial activity, and the dreams of the 2010 bill are being fulfilled. And I might say that it wasn't just Kay and me. There were a lot of other people involved in that, not the least of which was the Obama-Biden administration. And we had some head knocking and you know, foot stomping along the way, but that's all a part of the process.
It's fascinating to hear you describe this. It's almost the way those of us who lived through the 60s and watched NASA develop that amazing moon program and really international and national exploration of space in so many ways. It was incredible to have that done so quickly, and all of us followed every step along the way. This is kind of the way you're describing it. It sounds to me like the ultimate public-private partnership. And you're saying that was really the way you imagined it being in 2010. It's almost the way people imagined moon colonies back in the 60s. You said 2023. Do you think those dates are realistic? What might push it back?
Oh, yes. Our deputy administrator, Pam Melroy, an astronaut commander, one who, by the way, that I recommended for that position, and the president did nominate her. And she and I were out in California last week, and we saw a little startup company called Maston. I mean, it's like a glorified garage that they're working out of. And on a shoestring budget, they are building a lander. And this lander is going to land in 2023 on the South Pole of the moon. I mean, that's the ingenuity, the creativity that is bubbling up from these startups. And then the big boys, you see the success that SpaceX has had. The Boeing effort is still on the ground, but they'll eventually get up and deliver crew. And then we have this competition for the lander that SpaceX and a whole plethora of other companies, NASA awarded to SpaceX the first demonstration landing, but we need many landings in the future, and we're going to have another competition for all of them. So that's all coming. So it's exciting. And I've only talked a little bit about the space program. I haven't talked to you about the Space Telescope and going to the other planets and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California landing on Mars. I mean, turn me loose, and I'll tell you about all of those.
I'm excited just listening to you here. Look, will the moon colony be a permanent thing, or is this going to be very temporary at first, where crews will come and go, and there will be times when men and women are not living on the moon? What is the situation?
To begin with, as we learn how to survive and thrive in that kind of atmosphere, 250,000 miles away from Earth, it's going to be temporary. Even the orbiting so-called space station, but it won't be completely inhabited the whole time. We call it Gateway. It's an international mission. We have international components, just like we do on our own International Space Station in low Earth orbit. And that won't be occupied all the time. It'll be occupied at the times that we're going up. Perhaps it'll be a way station for missions that will go further out into the cosmos. Perhaps it may be the way station for us to have a crew as we assemble the eventual spacecraft that will take us to Mars. All of this on the moon is getting ready to go to Mars. And we full well intend to have a habitable kind of arrangement on the surface of the moon, 1/6 gravity, in preparation for doing a similar kind of thing on Mars, 1/3 gravity.
When do you think we'll finally get to Mars? I know it's impossible to predict a year, but approximately, even if it's a decade. When will
late in the decade of the 2030s.
Wonderful.
And that's realistic. But now you're talking about magnitudes of difficulty greater. We're talking about millions and millions and millions of miles. We're talking about if you have an emergency, you can't get back in 3 days. You're talking about, depending on where the planets are aligned, it could be months and months and months. And even under conventional propulsion today, it's going to take us 7-8 months to get there. And then to get the planets aligned right, to get back in the same amount of time, you're going to have to be on the surface for a while. And of course, we've all been absolutely enthralled by the Perseverance rover, which, by the way, is the size of a Volkswagen, even larger. I saw it. It's more like a Range Rover. I saw a facsimile of it last week in California. And then, of course, that Ingenuity, which is the little helicopter, which was just to prove that we could fly something. Now it's operating as a rover, a scout for the rover Perseverance as to where Perseverance ought to go. And then I wish I'd have I brought back with me a titanium tube. It's that long. And the drill that you've seen on the news, it drills down in the rock, it picks up a core of that rock, and it inserts it into this titanium tube. It's sealed, it's kept in the rover, and then we're going to send a fetch lander late in this decade that's then going to transfer some of those tubes in it and send it back to Earth. And then, just in case that doesn't work, we're going to deposit a half a dozen or dozen of these tubes with cores out of the Martian soil and rocks in different locations on the surface. And we're going out for ideas now about other landers, commercial, that would come and fetch these titanium tubes to take them back to Earth so that we can examine the components other than the examination we're doing on the rover right now and beaming it back to Earth. We're going to have live samples of Martian rocks and regolith that are going to then enable us to start to unlock the secrets of, was there any life there? Remember, we're in that Jezero crater, which we think is a dry lake bed. As a matter of fact, there's evidence on the cliff that's there by the crater that there is the stream of the river that came down. I mean, it's all the markings, Larry, of indeed that there was a lot of water flowing there. Now, we're talking about years and years ago. I mean, billions of years ago. If there was water, there was likely life. And when we get these samples back, we're going to be able to start to unlock some of those secrets.
Which would be more than exciting. It would be historic headlines for sure. You just reminded me in describing how difficult it is to get to Mars, going right back to the beginning when President Kennedy wanted to set the goal for accomplishment in space. At first, he wanted to send men to Mars. And he was talked out of this appropriately by Jim Webb, the head of your predecessor, the head of NASA. And this leads to my next question. Can you tell us a bit about the Jim Webb Telescope, which is also challenging for anyone who even imagines what's going to happen? Tell us about that.
This thing is $10 billion. It's going to launch December the 18th from French Guiana. It's on a French Ariane 5 rocket. It's going to be positioned 1 million miles from the Earth. If this is the Earth here and this is the sun, it's going to be 1 million miles over here on the opposite side of the Earth from the sun. It is even going to unfold a blanket on the back side of the telescope to cut out any additional sunlight that would be interfering with the collection of light and other wavelengths in the electromagnetic spectrum. And it is going to, not as the present telescope called Hubble that's orbiting the Earth, it looks at the vast expanse of the sky. This one is going to look through a keyhole. And Larry, it's going to peer back over 13 billion years ago, billion with a B. it's going to peer back to 250 years after the Big Bang. And we're going to see the light and the evidences of the formation of the first galaxy. And from that, and examining other suns or stars that we're going to find that we've never been able to see in these billions of galaxies that are out of there with billions of suns. And we're going to look for those little planets revolving about those suns. And, you know, it's very likely that we'll start to find another planet that has a habitable atmosphere that could sustain life like we know it here on Earth. But that's why we are going back to Venus. We're going to Mars. You got the sun, you got Venus, very shrouded atmosphere, so shrouded that on the surface you can melt lead. Then you have the Earth, then you have Mars, now a very cold climate with almost no atmosphere, 1% atmosphere. That's what's incredible, by the way, about the little helicopter, that it can actually fly in a 1% atmosphere. And so even in Venus and Mars, it is very possible, since our solar system has evolved over 3.5 billion years of evolution, it's very possible that we could see that there was life on one of these other planets, even in our solar system. So it's Katie bar the door, Larry.
That's really just amazing in so many ways. I think you're opening the eyes of a lot of students who are listening to this and maybe changing some career plans. So keep that in mind. They'll be coming down and asking you for jobs, you know, with the UVA connection. I just want you to know that.
We love our students. And by the way, we have 1,600 interns at NASA. So if you're interested, please apply.
Oh my gosh, 1,600 internships.
Yes, paid internships.
You just got some applications. I guarantee you, there are people listening to this right now who want an address. So do they send? Who do they send it to?
NASA.gov. Go on there and you can get the instructions.
Fantastic. I'm going to detour slightly. As I say, I want to get to some student questions. This is more earthbound, and of course, my field is politics, and you were in it for a long time. Lots of people are concerned, maybe wrongly, but they're concerned about what China is doing and how China is organizing now its own space station and other activities using space. What is your relationship, or NASA's relationship, with China's space agency? How do you feel about how the relationship has developed and is developing?
Unfortunately, the relationship is strained because China is very secretive. And the way to run a civilian space program is to be open and transparent. And they have not been. Basically, the Chinese program is a military program, even though they claim otherwise. But having said that, China is good. Look at the prospects that they have for the future. Look at how they have advanced within the last 10 years. I think we're in a space race with China. And it's too bad that, you know, we were in a space race with the Soviet Union. And when we beat them going to the moon, then they decided they were going to cooperate in the civilian realm. Started in the middle of the Cold War, the Soviet Union, 1975, an American crew and a Soviet crew rendezvoused and docked in space and lived together for 9 days. That started a whole new era that continues to this day of cooperation in the civilian space program. And then we built the International Space Station with the Russians. And there are Russian components on the International Space Station. And there was a time of 10 years that we actually relied on the Russian Soyuz rocket to get our American astronauts, after we shut down the space shuttle in 2011, until we flew Americans on American rockets to the space station in 2020, 9 years later. There was a time that we relied on the Russians. So it's a partnership that still endures. I wish the Chinese government would accept our invitations and be sincere and transparent instead of secretive. But thus far, that is not their modus operandi.
Well, I hope they're listening, Senator, because that makes a lot of sense. And you're so right to point to the cooperation between the USSR and the US. And I remember that mission in the mid-'70s. It did make a difference, and it caused people to reconsider peaceful coexistence, that it could go beyond simply avoiding the use of nuclear weapons, and we could have a positive relationship. Now, obviously, tensions have increased between the U.S. and the Soviet, or the Russia now, in recent years. Has that affected our space cooperation, or is that in a totally different plane?
That has affected us very little in our civilian space cooperation. And the proof's in the pudding. Look at the International Space Station. We built it together. We operate it together. There's always a Russian and an American on the station. There are many other nations that join in. There's a French European Space Agency astronaut up there, an Italian one. The next crew that's going at the end of this month has a German ESA astronaut going. So it's truly international. And all the trouble that we have with President Putin has not affected our relationship with the Russians, the Russian Space Agency called Roscosmos, the personal relationships between our astronauts and their cosmonauts has always been very good. I wish we could do that with the Chinese space program, but thus far they refuse.
Well, we hope they will reconsider. I think you made a very good point there. Let me bring one of the students in right now, and he wants to add, this is John Michael DeYang, who's a third-year government major, and he wants to ask you a question about NASA and the Space Force. Are you there? John, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Senator, for being here today. I just wanted to ask about, the Space Force, the newly created Space Force. Is there any present collaboration with them? And if not, in what areas do you think in the near future that there might be some collaboration?
There is collaboration, but understand that the missions are separate. The Space Force is primarily defense. NASA is civilian. But there are a number of collaborations: the development of space technology, the sharing of deconfliction of assets in space, the concern of attacking the problem of all the space junk that's up there, space debris that often threaten our satellites and certainly potentially threaten human life on the International Space Station. So there are a number of things that we collaborate on. The head of the Space Force, General Raymond, and I are personal friends, and we can enjoy each other's bailiwicks and help each other out. But of course, their mission is defense. It's an increasing role as space becomes a domain that our adversaries are increasingly active in. And that's why I think you will see the Space Force be a very active part of our United States Defense Department.
That's a great question, John. Senator, just to follow that up a little bit, some Democrats obviously had questions about the Space Force, partly because it was pushed so heavily by President Trump. But you've just given a reason why it might appeal to everyone, and that leads to this question. You've experienced this yourself intensely. We have such a polarized, partisan political environment in the United States. Could NASA and space exploration be a way to reunite people in the sense that, go ahead, Senator.
Absolutely, it already has. NASA's not only bipartisan, it's nonpartisan. And therefore, that's why NASA has the goodwill that it has among the American people. It's also an exciting place to work, and by the way, has been voted for 9 years in a row as the best agency in the federal government in which to work.
Wow.
Part of that patina is that it is a unifying force. And Larry, you put your finger on it. In this era of raw politics, that politics has become a blood sport, that it is so divisive, even hateful, that it is so subject to misinformation and the use of that in just diabolical ways. NASA is a unifying force, and it's a popular unifying force, and it is a bipartisan. And so who did I visit today? I visited a Republican senator over on Capitol Hill, who's one of our biggest fans. And so NASA has a lot to teach the rest of government just about how we get along.
So you see both Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill being about equally supportive of NASA?
Yes. Now, everybody has their own individual interest. So you've heard Bernie Sanders, who is a personal friend of mine, say he doesn't like at all billionaires getting billions from the government. So I talked to Bernie and I said, Bernie, I know what you feel and I understand where you're coming from, but NASA is a lot more. And I started to describe the telescope and Mars and oh, by the way, NASA is the point of the spear on climate change. How in the world do you think we're doing anything about climate change if it weren't for NASA that designs them, builds them, launches them, and therefore we can measure what is happening to the climate? This is NASA assets, part of which we turn over to NOAA. They do that mission, including the National Weather Service. But there's a lot else up there that NASA does. And now we're going to build 5 great new observatories that is going to give precision in our measurement of what is happening to the climate. It's going to create a 3D composite of exactly what is happening to the land, the water, the ice, and the atmosphere. And it's happening. And NASA is big time involved.
Again, I think not many people listening to this knew about that. And of course, for young people, climate change and the climate crisis is right up at the top of their priorities. So I think some people watching this right now will want to pay more attention to that aspect of NASA. Now, the science, as you're saying, is the most important thing. And it's also vital for people to regain whatever confidence they've lost in science, not because science deserved it, but because some people politically have seen advantage in attacking science and also in putting out all that misinformation that we've seen, whether it's on vaccines or anything else. But people are also interested in their participation potentially in space travel. And of course, we now have seats available in some of these operations, Blue Origin and the like, Virgin Atlantic, Virgin Galactic, I suppose, and some of the others. When do you think people are going to have the opportunity to reserve a seat and not have to pay $250,000 for it, and also not be a TV star who's 90 years old? When is this going to happen?
Well, it's going to be a while because space is hard, and as a result, space is expensive. So it's going to be a while. So whether you're William Shatner, who went up and back, and understand that's a lot different from if you just go up until you basically stall out at about 55 miles up, and then you come back. Now, that's a big feat to accomplish, but that's a lot different than going 17,500 miles an hour to insert into orbit and circle the globe and then come back. So it's going to be a while. That's expensive, but the cost will come down. It's just like our rides to space because of competition, mainly brought on by SpaceX, by the way, and some of these startups. What you're finding is that it's a lot cheaper to send your payload into space today than it used to be because of the commercial competition of offering rides into space. So too for human rides into space. Over time, that'll come down.
So you're basically telling us that those of us from the 60s who watched 2001: A Space Odyssey is going to be more like 3001: A Space Odyssey. Is that about right?
I don't know the timing, but the way that it has dramatically come down just in the last 15 years, I wouldn't stretch yourself all the way out to the end of this century.
Good. I don't think I can make it. So that's great. Some will. Some of the students on this call will absolutely be there in 3001. Let me call on another student, Susan Easterday. She's fourth year and commerce and government major here at the University of Virginia. And while you've already told us about the internship, she wants to ask about other opportunities for the general public to get involved. Susan, take it away.
Hi, thank you so much for being here today. This has been so interesting to learn about so far. Like Professor Sabato said, I was wondering if there are any opportunities for the general public to get involved with or participate in some of the work that NASA does.
Well, let me tell you, we're looking for talent all the time. If you, Susan, have an interest in working at NASA, we want to talk to you. You're fourth year, so you're coming out soon. But even if you don't want to work for a government agency, look at all of these commercial entities that are now doing exciting things. Or let's say you're in commerce. Let's say you end up one day in journalism. Look at the extraordinary tale to be told about the advances in space as a journalist and relaying this very complicated information in a way that the average person can relate to it. And I think there are unlimited possibilities for you and your colleagues in order to get involved. And we want to talk to you.
That's wonderful. And I know we have some aerospace engineers, Senator, who are listening to this presentation, and they would be most likely, I would think, to apply to NASA. We always hear, you and I can remember from the 60s, hearing people say, well, this is fine and good, and it's exciting to see astronauts go into space and land on the moon. But look at all this money they're spending, and it could be better spent improving fill in the blank, whatever it was they were in favor of. They would talk about taking the money from the space program. Obviously, it's a much smaller percentage of the budget today than it was back in the 1960s. But there's still some of that criticism. You've answered it by telling us about climate change and some of the other pure science experiments. But how would you answer anyone who expresses that kind of criticism?
Well, understandably, when we've got so many problems on Earth, and you stack them up against the expenditure of anything, defense, foreign relations, the Commerce Department and helping business, the money that we spend at the Department of Education, so very important, the money at the Department of Labor in ensuring that we have safe working. I mean, you can go on and on. Every one of them is important. But is fulfilling the destiny of the American character, is that important? We've always been explorers and adventurers. We've always had a frontier. In the development of this country, it was a westward frontier. Now that frontier is upward. And it's part of who we are as explorers. We don't want to ever give that up because that's part of our character as a people. Now, we hadn't even talked about all the spin-offs, what has affected our lifestyles, what has become a lot cheaper, all as a result of the space program. Let me give you a couple of examples. So we go to the moon. Well, you had to go to the moon, light in weight, small in volume, and highly reliable. And of course, that brought about the boom in micro-miniaturization of technology. Give you another example. In your pocket is a cell phone, and in that cell phone is a camera that takes unbelievably clear pictures. That camera is on a chip. That was developed by NASA in part of its Earth observing satellites in our climate program. And I could go on and on. How about, the research that we're doing utilizing on the International Space Station, 0G, where you can grow crystals more pure because gravity doesn't warp them. They are now experimenting with growing of human tissue that we could ultimately grow human organs in a way that we can't do on Earth in order to help people's health and prolong their lives. Give you another example. Fiber optics, you can only make them so pure in one gravity, but go to near zero gravity, and those fiber optics can be made so much more pure. Give you another example. Cancer research. Understanding and unlocking the secrets of certain proteins that we don't know the molecular structure, because you can grow those proteins into crystals in 0G, and they become so much more pure that with an electron microscope, even when you bring them back to Earth, or X-ray diffraction, we can unlock the molecular structure to manipulate the protein to do whatever we want it to do in whatever research we're in. In this particular case, it was a cancer research experiment that I conducted 36 years ago, and we are still growing those many different kind of crystals today on the International Space Station in the research that I just explained to you. And so, yeah, space is expensive, but so was the creation of an aviation industry, although far less difficult because you're dealing with air instead of the vacuum of space, instead of the energy that it takes to get into orbit or to escape velocity from orbit out of Earth's gravitational hold. So you got to be broad-minded in the question, why spend money on space when we've got so many things down here? Maybe what we're doing up there is going to help us, and already has many times over, on what we're doing here on Earth.
Oh, that's remarkable. And I read a little bit about the cancer experiment you conducted when you were on the space shuttle. Maybe you can describe that a little further. And also, what has happened with medical experiments in space on our space vehicles since that time?
Space being a very unforgiving atmosphere, what you do not want is somebody to get up there and have an emergency and you suddenly have to get them home. So you want to check them out pretty good before they go, but there's always going to be some kind of emergency. And you want to be prepared. And we can't be prepared for everything. But what I described on the research, here's another one. We're using zero-G to develop pharmaceuticals that will attack diseases here on Earth. And there are a number of those that are just about to emerge. And Larry, this is a good example of where we think that if you really get this to the point that it works, you're going to see the commercial business in space explode if you can develop certain compounds using zero-G to do it that are going to be applicable to helping us with diseases here on Earth. Give you another example. What about going out on some of these asteroids that might have precious metals? We are just now going to these asteroids. We've got a mission that's coming back from an asteroid called Bennu right now, that we had an arm go out from the spacecraft and sucked up material off the asteroid. That mission is on its way back to Earth. We're going to see what's on that particular asteroid. Last weekend, we launched a mission called Lucy after the 3.5 million year old skeleton, because we're sending it to an asteroid belt near Jupiter, which are some of the early remnants of not only our solar system, but probably our galaxy. It's a 12-year mission. We're going to take photographs as we go by these millions of asteroids and see if we can learn what they look like, what they're composed of. What is it going to tell us about the formation of our solar system and our galaxy? And get this one, we've got another mission called DART that's taken off in a little bit. It is going to an asteroid, and most of your students will remember a Bruce Willis movie called Armageddon. And although Bruce Willis, it's all really space fantasy because you couldn't fly a space shuttle up there, and they use a nuclear bomb to divert the asteroid that's incoming to Earth. It's going to completely blow Earth to smithereens. This is what we're doing with DART. Way, way out there, we're going to intercept this asteroid, and DART is going to hit it at 15,000 miles an hour. We're going to see if we ever so slightly can move its trajectory And then, since it's millions and millions of miles away, then we're going to watch its trajectory and see, did we move it? And if it was successful, then if we discover in the next century that an asteroid is inbound for Earth, an asteroid that would not only blow up Earth or either change it like an asteroid did when the dinosaurs lived and wiped out the dinosaurs, then that's the way of avoiding that catastrophe. That's all going on right now.
You know, it's amazing to listen to this. I think I keep up with the news, but obviously I don't keep up with it enough. We get so wrapped up in, little bitty fights or even big fights occurring in government and other fields that we miss the big picture. And you're really firing my imagination, and I'm old. I can only imagine what you're doing with the young people who are here. It makes me want to retire and go down to NASA and bother you. But I won't do that. I promise I won't do that.
Well, my critics would like me to take a space flight again. They'd like me to go to Mars on a one-way trip.
Well, Mars is kind of our alternate reality, isn't it? If anything ever happens to Earth, we may have to escape to Mars. So that's another reason for exploring. And I'm fascinated by what you've told me about DART, D-A-R-T?
DART is the acronym.
Well, that's amazing because so many people bring this up. What's going to happen when the asteroid hits or the meteor tears Earth apart? How universal is our vision of the universe? Will we be able to see something coming, even a smaller asteroid before it hits, or is it only going to work with a large one?
The answer is yes. We can see small, we can see large. It would only take an asteroid the size of a football field in diameter, and you're talking about major damage to planet Earth. The force of that after it goes through the Earth's atmosphere, and if it's still the size of a football field hitting the planet, you're talking about a major disaster. Larry, before we leave, I hadn't even talked about the search for extraterrestrial life. What do you think what do you think we're doing on Mars? What do you think we're looking for life? This is a part of NASA's mission. That's what this telescope is going to be looking for. Are there other planets elsewhere that there is life? Now, I know what you've seen is what those Navy pilots saw in 2004, and there have been some 300 sightings since then. And I've talked to those pilots, and they know they saw something, and their radars locked onto it. And then all of a sudden it was here on the surface, and then it's there. And they don't know what it is, and we don't know what it is. We hope it's not an adversary here on Earth that has that kind of technology. But it's something. And so this is a mission that we're constantly looking. Who is out there? Who are we? How did we get here? How did we become as we are? How did we develop? How did we civilize? And are those same conditions out there in a universe that has billions of other suns in billions of other galaxies? It's so large, I can't conceive it.
You anticipated one of the questions that I have here because it was suggested to me by many different people. They did want your comment on what you think the fighter pilot saw. I think most people saw that 60 Minutes piece, and there were a lot of newspaper pieces about whether or not it was Russia or China, or perhaps more likely some extraterrestrial intelligent beings. what is your theory? What you've heard a lot of options. Which one do you think is the most credible if you can choose?
Larry, I don't know the answer to that, but I do know this, that my personal opinion is that the universe is so big, and now there are even theories that there might be other universes. And if that's the case, who am I to say that planet Earth is the only location of a life form that is civilized and organized like ours? But I'll tell you what that makes me think. I better be a better steward of what we have, because we're messing it up. And we're messing it up just the way we're treating each other. And so I know what my mission is: to be a better steward of this planet and be a better citizen of planet Earth. But are there other planet Earths out there? I certainly think so, because the universe is so big.
And of course, Einstein believed in parallel universes. So that's good enough for me if Einstein believed in it. And he inspired a lot of Rod Serling's Twilight Zones. So it is amazing when you think about it, and what may be there that we can discover. And of course, we always want America to be at the forefront. That's what you're doing. This has been so inspiring, I think, for everybody who is watching and listening. It certainly has been inspiring for me. There's one fun, frivolous question you could answer in one phrase, and I'm going to call on our last student, Isabel Dulbach, who is second year with an undeclared major, and she has a very simple question for you. Go for it, Isabel.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I hate to be the one to ask such a divisive and political question, but which is your favorite, Star Wars or Star Trek?
I like them both. I think that they have both added in that early part of excitement about space, right concurrent with the time that we were going to the moon in the Apollo program. Now, Isabel, that was the Apollo generation. Your generation is the Artemis generation. In Greek mythology, Artemis is the sister of Apollo. And in the Artemis generation, we're going to land the first woman on the moon, the first person of color on the moon, and then we're going to venture out. And so if you think back to the original Star Trek, that was a very diverse crew. Remember, they had Lieutenant Uhura, an African American, Nichelle Nichols, the actress. They had an Asian American that was part of that crew. That was role modeling way back, even before Apollo. Now we're bringing that all into reality with the Artemis generation.
Senator, that concludes the program, and I have to say it's one of the best programs we've ever had. And I want you to know, while you belong to everyone and you've got a lot of affiliations, we are very proud to claim a part of you here at the University of Virginia. You make us proud, and we're proud of you, and we thank you so much, not just for joining us, but for what you do every day in seeing the future and making it happen. So, Senator, I just salute you, and I wish you well, and I hope that President Biden gives you every possible money that you need. I'm going to write him and tell him that. He'll listen to me.
He's not the only one. I have to convince the Congress too.
Yeah, well, they're not in a lot. So it's really what President Biden decides. Maybe the BBB, the Build Back Better. I hope that's got a piece for NASA too. I don't know. Anyway, thank you, Senator. It was so much fun, and thank you for joining us. We enjoyed it enormously.
See you, Larry.
Take care.